What is that thing? Oh God! Oh God! Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your innkeeper, Vase Odin, and today we'll be talking about Mark Harrigan, the soldier. Mark Harrigan is a soldier, veteran of the Great War. Some of the men who came back from the war were scarred by things they saw and things they had to do. But Mark was scarred by something even more nefarious. The timeline of his story is a bit of a mystery. It's not clear whether he went to fight before or after Sophie's demise, but it is clear that both events have marked him forever. While fighting in the trenches, a wave of enemy combatants were coming at Mark and his company, but before they stormed the trenches, they seemed to have turned away and ran, or somehow disappeared. Mark's company decided to take advantage of the retreat, and even though a thick fog had covered the battlefield, they rushed forward. But before they could reach the enemy, Mark saw something horrible and unexplainable. A gargantuan being far in the distance walked over troops without regard to which side they fought for, and stomped them without a second thought, as if they were ants. This event scarred Mark tremendously. But that wasn't the end of it. Back home, Mark still struggles with the reality of what he witnessed. As if it weren't enough, there are indications that some similar evil devoured Sophie, someone Mark loved deeply. It is not known if Sophie is his wife, girlfriend, sister, daughter, or friend, but there are some strong indications that Sophie may have been a romantic interest of some sort. Whatever she was to Mark, she was undoubtedly important to him, and was killed or devoured by some ancient and evil creature. Ever since, Mark has struggled with PTSD and even had an occurrence while at Velma's Diner in Arkham, momentarily becoming immobilized and unresponsive until a server woke him from his trance. Mark has vowed to find the beings he knows exist unbeknownst to mankind and make them pay for what they have done. In Arkham Horror the card game, Mark is a guardian with a combat value of 5, the highest in the game as of the recording of this video. He has a 3 in willpower and agility and a 2 in intellect. His special ability allows him to draw a card whenever damage is placed on a card he controls. He has a 9 in health and a very concerning 5 in sanity, but most people play as if he has a 5 in both. We'll discuss his health further in just a moment. His Elder Sign effect is a +1 for each damage on Mark Harrigan. His deck building requirements are Guardian and Neutral cards level 0 to 5 and Tactic cards level 0. He has 3 special cards, one of which starts in play. Sophie is a double-sided signature card. It starts with the special ability, Fast Action, take 1 direct damage, and get +2 to a skill check. This allows Mark to use his health as a resource and allows him to turn the tide on a skill test that may be very important to pass. The other aspect of the card is that it flips over if he has 5 or more damage. When it flips, Mark gets -1 to all of his skills. This is why most people treat Mark as a 5 health investigator. The key to making the most of his ability is to keep your health above 5. Now, before we move on, I do have to mention a controversial card interaction. Some have suggested that the card Reliable can be attached to Sophie, giving you a +2 skill test and a +1 to all stats while resolving the trigger. Those who say it doesn't work claim that it has something to do with the timing of the triggers of both cards. As of the making of this video, I haven't found an official ruling on this, so in my games, I don't see why it wouldn't work. In your games, that may be different, and again, I'm not an expert in the specific timings. It seems like it's okay to me. In addition to Sophie, Mark has a signature weakness called Shell Shock. When you reveal the card, you have to take 1 horror for every 2 damage on you. With such a low horror threshold, this can be a game ender for Mark. On the other hand, you can assign the damage to allies and other assets, So, if you're running Mark with a lot of allies, which generally you kind of want to, it's not going to be super terrible. At least it's not direct horror. That's not to minimize the potential negatives of this card. Pulled at the wrong time, even with a properly built deck, this can be devastating for you. His other signature card is the Homefront. 4 combat icons. It's a skill, so you're always going to commit it for the 4. And if you succeed in the skill test during an attack, you can move a damage from mark to the attacked enemy. That's pretty awesome. And the way it works, you're moving damage. You're not dealing damage. You're not assigning damage. It just moves, which is pretty cool. There's some other cards and some enemies that when you deal damage, things happen. In this case, you're not dealing damage. Now, with him being a soldier, it's only fitting that most Mark decks do run a lot of firearms. And that's also for a good reason. Mechanically, Mark actually benefits pretty nicely with firearm assets. His really high fight value just adds to the efficiency and accuracy of each ammo or each ammunition that you run with it. Specifically, the 32 Colt. With a 5 in combat already, the lack of a +1 to hit with the 32 Colt is not so bad in Mark, and the additional ammo is definitely a welcome benefit to the card, specifically in most Mark decks. Most Mark decks also run a lot of cards that can absorb a lot of damage. Because you'll be taking damage deliberately and you don't want to go past that 5 damage threshold, a lot of cards like True Grit and certain allies that can absorb damage are definitely a nice welcome asset to any Mark deck. The Guard Dog is great because not only are you taking damage and assigning it to it, but you're dealing some damage back for every time that you do take a damage. And that 1 Horror Soak is also a nice welcome thing as well. The Beat Cop is also a good one, specifically the level 2 version, where you can assign a bit more damage and it doesn't die after 1 use of its special ability. Plus, the added combat bonus is definitely something that will really benefit Mark as well. And of course, since you're running a lot of firearms, extra ammunition is also very, very nice to add in there. The cost of 2 helps because playing this is preferential to playing another firearm. Usually firearms cost 3 or 4 or even more than that. So a cost of 2 is certainly welcome. Mark is one of the Guardian Investigators that has a lot of trouble with resources. There's a lot of expensive assets in Guardian, so Mark generally doesn't have a lot of resources to play around with. Cards that heal also are great in Mark, specifically if you unwillingly flip Sophie and get a -1 to all your stats. The only way to get rid of it and flip it back is to heal some of that damage. So healing is very important in Mark decks. I recommend at least, maybe 3 or 4 healing cards. Definitely could come in handy if you run into some trouble. Now, Mark can play tactic cards. There's quite a few tactic cards available as of the making of this video. Some are better than others. Most Mark decks do not want to run Backstab. Not only is it expensive for a one-time use, the dealing +2 damage and having to use your agility score instead of combat is actually a hindrance to Mark. Not only do you have to have evaded the monster, which would take an action, but then you're attacking it with a stat that's a lot lower than your combat value just to do 2 additional damage. So you're doing 3 damage for 2 actions. You could have done 4 damage for 2 actions if you had a firearm, and a higher chance of success. In addition, Cunning Distraction, a card that I really like. Unfortunately, it is very expensive to play. It's a very powerful card, so there's a reason why it's so expensive. But a 5 cost in a deck that's already struggling to pay for their assets is just a lot to ask for, and unfortunately not going to happen. There are some Mark decks, though, that could get some good use out of this card, so I'm not foo-fooing it completely. As I always say, I never deal in absolutes. The only time I deal in absolutes is I never deal in absolutes. Now, when working tactic cards for Mark, I think the ones that tend to work best are movement cards, cards that also help him gain some action advantage such as Shortcut. Moving for free as a free action is very nice. You can also move enemies around with it that you've engaged, helping your allies be a little bit safer while you handle them. Shortcut is just an amazing card, and the fact that Mark can take it just makes him even more awesome. Another great movement card that's also a tactic is Elusive. Unfortunately, you won't bring the enemies with you by doing this, but this can get you out of a very tight situation, or some situation where you've gotten in over your head. It's definitely nice to have it as a backup plan and get out of dodge quickly. Free damage is also pretty nice, so Coup de Grace also being a tactic is nice. The 2 combat icons definitely help this card be a little bit better. I otherwise wouldn't necessarily run it in Mark for 1 free damage. There's definitely better cards that can help with that. But the fact that it has 2 combat icons certainly makes me think twice, and throwing it in the deck, even if I don't need to be doing that free damage or I don't have the resources, I at least can commit it for 2 combat icons. Now, one card that I normally don't care for too much in Survivor is Hiding Spot, but in Mark, this card is actually great. Now, if you're playing solo, I don't recommend it at all in Mark. But if you're playing multiplayer, especially a 4-player game, this card is amazing. Notice that for a cost of 1 resource and no actions, because it's a fast action, you can play this card at any location, so you don't have to be at the location that you want to affect. So let's say you're playing in a team of 4, and your weaker party members, your seekers, are out somewhere investigating, and they get caught up with a bunch of powerful enemies that they're not able to handle, and it's going to take you a round to get to them. Well, you can play this Hiding Spot to buy them around to get away, and to buy you around to get there. And that's a very specific scenario, but there's plenty of situations where someone might get in trouble in a multiplayer game, even if it's just against 1 enemy and they're just not equipped to handle it. Play Hiding Spot so they can get out of there, and then you can move in and deal with it. It is actually a really surprisingly great card in Mark that I never otherwise would have thought of, but it just so happens I pulled up the cards in Arkham DV, and this card stuck out to me for a minute. I tried it and it worked out awesome, so I highly recommend you play that card in your multiplayer Mark decks. And that does it for today's video on Mark Harrigan. Hopefully you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, please click on the subscribe button if you haven't already, and click the notification bell so you get notifications whenever I put a new video up. I'm your innkeeper, Vase Odin. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a good night. I am the Allfather.